wind hit me first, before I even saw her, and it hit so hard that my sensor lens cracked along the edge. I am Selith, and I was not built for cold like this. My people come from warm rock and slow rivers. We do not belong on ice. Yet there I was, pressed into a crevice on a ridge above a human outpost, watching two small figures fight a storm that wanted to erase them both. I had been sent to this moon to observe, nothing more. My orders were simple. Watch the humans. Record how they behave when nothing is easy. My superiors wanted numbers, not stories. They wanted to know how fast a human gives up. I did not expect the answer I got that night, and I do not think I will ever forget it. The storm came down without warning, the way storms do on this moon. One moment the sky was pale and quiet. The next, it turned the color of a bruise, and the wind began to scream across the ridge like something alive and angry. I saw two soldiers running for shelter, boots sinking into snow that had not been there an hour earlier. One of them was tall, moving fast, calling out to the other over the noise. The second one, shorter and slower, stumbled once, twice, and then the ground beneath him simply broke apart. It was not an explosion. It was worse, in a quiet way. The ridge had been holding a shelf of packed snow for who knows how long, and the weight finally became too much. The shelf gave way beneath his feet, and he dropped, along with 2 meters of collapsing white, into a hollow that closed over him almost instantly. I have seen creatures die in snow before. It happens fast, and it happens quietly, and by the time anyone realizes what occurred, there is nothing left to do but mark the location and move on. That is what I expected to see. That is what the numbers told me would happen. The tall one, the woman, did not move on. Her name, I would later learn from the outpost's communication log, was Laura Bennett. She was a corporal, 26 years old, assigned to a supply post that had no business being this far from the equator. The man she was with, the one who had gone under the snow, was Daniel Cole, a technician barely out of training. I do not know if they were close friends before that night. I know they became something closer than friends in the minutes that followed. Laura did not scream for help, though help was far away, and would not have come in time regardless. She dropped to her knees at the edge of the broken shelf and began to dig with her bare hands. I watched her pull off her gloves and throw them aside, and for a moment I believed the wind had simply carried them from her hands by accident. It had not. She had taken them off on purpose, because gloves slow down fingers, and fingers needed to move fast if Daniel was going to breathe again. I ran the numbers in my head, the way my people always run numbers. Wind chill at that altitude. Exposure time for exposed human skin. The depth of snow above a buried body, and how long oxygen might last in the small pocket of air trapped beneath it, if there was any pocket at all. My calculations gave Daniel perhaps 6 minutes before the cold alone would end him. Even if the lack of air did not, my calculations gave Laura perhaps 11 minutes of function in her hands before the cold took her ability to dig away entirely. She was already past 4 minutes when I started counting. I want to explain something about my people before I continue. We are not cruel. We do not enjoy watching suffering, and we do not stand by for entertainment, but we are careful, and carefulness has taught us that some fights are not worth beginning, because the ending is already written before the first move is made. When the ground breaks and takes a body under 2 meters of snow in temperatures this low, the ending is written. Every species we have studied before humans understood this instinct, somewhere deep in their bones. Fighting a written ending is not bravery to us. It is a waste of the little time you have left to save yourself. Laura Bennett did not seem to know this rule, or she knew it and simply refused to obey it. She dug with her hands until her hands stopped working the way hands are supposed to work, and then she kept digging anyway. I watched her movements slow, her fingers curling into shapes that were no longer useful for digging, and still she pushed snow aside with her forearms, with the flat of her wrists, with anything that could move even a little bit of white out of the way. She was talking the entire time, though the wind stole most of the words before they reached my sensors. I caught fragments. Hold on. Almost there. Stay with me. She was not speaking to herself. She was speaking to a person she could not see, buried beneath snow that showed no sign of moving, in a language meant to convince someone who could not possibly hear it that he was not alone. At the 9-minute mark, by my count, she found his arm. I have reviewed this moment many times since that night, because I still do not fully understand what I saw. Her hands were, by every measure my instruments could take, no longer capable of fine movement. The tissue temperature alone should have made her fingers useless, stiff as old wood, unable to grip anything at all. Yet she wrapped what remained of her strength around that arm and pulled, throwing her whole body backward into the wind, using her legs and her back and whatever will was left inside her, because her hands could no longer be trusted to do the work alone. Daniel Cole came free of the snow at 11 minutes, exactly at the mark my calculations had given as her limit. He was not moving. His face, when I finally saw it through the blowing white, had the stillness that I associate with the end of things. I remember thinking, with something close to relief, that at least the observation was complete. At least I finally had the ending my numbers had predicted, delayed by 5 long minutes of unnecessary struggle, but arrived at all the same. Laura did not agree with my conclusion. She dragged him by the collar of his jacket, because her arms could no longer bend properly at the elbow, moving him a short distance to a patch of ground where the snow was thinner and the wind slightly less cruel. Then she knelt over him, placed her ruined hands flat against his chest, and began to push. I did not know, at that point, what this action meant. I had read reports about human medical practices, but reading a report and watching a living thing perform the action are very different experiences. She pushed down on his chest, counted under her breath, tilted his head back, breathed air from her own lungs into his, and pushed again. Over and over, without pause, without any sign that she believed it was working, because by every visible measure it was not working. His body did not respond. His chest did not rise on its own between her breaths. The storm did not quiet to give her a moment of peace to check whether her efforts meant anything at all. She kept going anyway. I began to understand, somewhere around the 15-minute mark of this second struggle, that I was watching something my language does not have a proper word for. We have words for survival. We have words for retreat, for acceptance, for the wisdom of knowing when a fight is finished. We do not have a word for choosing to keep fighting a fight that every observable fact says is already lost, purely because the person you are fighting for cannot fight for themselves anymore. The storm did not care about any of this, of course. It grew worse before it grew better, the way storms on this moon always do, and there was a stretch of perhaps 10 minutes where I lost visual contact with both of them entirely. My sensor was cracked, my patience was thin, and I remember lowering my equipment and simply waiting, the way one waits for a report to finish writing itself, because I believed there was nothing left to see. I was wrong. When the wind finally dropped enough for my sensor to find them again, Daniel Cole was breathing. Not steadily, not strongly, but breathing. His chest rising and falling in small, ragged movements that I would not have believed possible given everything I had measured about his condition only minutes before. Laura Bennett was still beside him, no longer pushing on his chest, but pressing her own body against his, sharing whatever warmth her frozen limbs still held, because the heat cell in her suit had already been used. I did not understand this either, not until I reviewed the outpost's equipment logs later, and learned that she had activated her suit's only working heat source, and pressed it directly against Daniel's chest sometime during those 10 minutes I could not see, leaving her own body with nothing but the cold. A rescue skimmer reached them 40 minutes after the ridge first broke apart. I watched it land, watched 2 more humans in heavy suits lift both bodies onto stretchers, watched the calm, practiced movements of people who had clearly done this before, on a moon that did not often let anyone walk away from it. I stayed in my crevice until the skimmer disappeared into the gray sky, and then I stayed a while longer, because I did not entirely trust my own instruments, and I wanted to be certain of what I had recorded before I sent it anywhere. Here is what my report said, in the end, stripped of anything my superiors would consider unnecessary detail. Subject Laura Bennett, corporal, engaged in extended rescue effort beyond calculated viability threshold. Companion subject Daniel Cole, recovered alive. Both subjects transported to medical facility. Outcome, survival, contrary to initial projection. That is what the report said. It is not everything that happened. What actually happened is that I watched a woman with hands too cold to properly grip anything continue digging through snow for 9 minutes because she refused to accept that a friend was already gone. I watched her drag a body twice her own size across broken ground, using muscles that should not have still been working. I watched her press her mouth against a stranger's lips, breathing air into lungs that showed no sign of wanting it, for 15 minutes, without once checking whether it was worth continuing. I watched her give away the only source of warmth she had left, not to save herself, but to keep someone else's heart beating a little longer. I have spent many years cataloging other species for my superiors. I have watched creatures on 11 different worlds face the end of their lives, and every single one of them, when the moment came, accepted it, not with joy, not without fear, but with a kind of quiet understanding that some things cannot be changed once they have begun. That understanding is not weakness. It is wisdom, built over generations, teaching each new life how to recognize when a fight is finished so that energy is not wasted where it cannot help. Laura Bennett did not have that wisdom, or she had it and chose to ignore it entirely, and I no longer know which of those two things is more remarkable. I returned to my ship 3 days later, once the storm systems had cleared enough for safe travel, and I filed my full report exactly as required. But before I sent it, I added a section that was not requested, a section my superiors would likely dismiss as unnecessary sentiment from an observer who had spent too long alone in the cold. I wrote it anyway, because I believed, and still believe, that it matters. I wrote that humans, at least the ones I observed on this particular night, do not measure a fight by whether it can be won. They measure it by whether someone they care about is still worth fighting for. I wrote that this makes them dangerous in ways my people have not fully accounted for, because a species that refuses to recognize a lost cause cannot be reliably predicted using the tools we have always trusted. I wrote that if humanity ever faces something larger than a single storm, something the size of an invasion or a plague or a war that no reasonable calculation says can be survived, I do not believe they will behave the way our models suggest they should. I do not believe they will give up simply because the numbers tell them to. My superiors have not yet responded to that section of my report. I imagine they are still deciding what to make of it, the way they decide most things, slowly and with great caution. I am not in a hurry for their answer. I already have mine. 2 months after the storm, I returned briefly to observe the outpost one final time before my assignment ended. I did not expect to see either of them again, since human recovery after an event like that is rarely quick, and reassignment to a distant post is common practice. But there she was, Laura Bennett, walking the perimeter of the outpost with a slight stiffness in her stride that had not been there before, her hands wrapped in thick gloves that I suspected she now wore out of necessity rather than habit. Beside her, moving a little slower but moving all the same, was Daniel Cole. They were talking about nothing important from what my sensors could pick up: supply schedules, a broken heater in one of the storage units. Ordinary things, the kind of conversation that happens between two people who have simply returned to the business of living. Neither of them looked at the ridge where it had happened. Neither of them seemed to need to. I watched them for a while longer than my orders required, and I thought about the 11 species I had studied before this one, all of them teaching me the same careful lesson about knowing when to stop. I thought about how confident I had been, that night on the ridge, that I already understood the ending before it arrived. I was wrong about the ending. I think I may have been wrong about a great many things. There is a phrase Laura used once, recorded by the outpost's internal communication system during her recovery, that I have returned to many times since. A medic asked her, once she was well enough to speak clearly, why she had not simply accepted that Daniel was gone when the odds were so clearly against him. Her answer was short, and she did not seem to think it was remarkable at all. She said that giving up was always available. It would still be available later. But a chance, even a small one, does not wait around forever, and she was not willing to let it pass by just because it looked impossible. I do not know if every human would say the same thing in her place. I am not foolish enough to believe one story tells me everything about an entire species, but I have decided, after much consideration, that my earlier report was too small for what I witnessed. Numbers alone cannot hold what happened on that ridge. No calculation I know how to perform can properly measure the space between a written ending and a woman who refused to read it. I left that moon not long after, carrying my final observations back to my own people, who will likely file them away with the same careful caution they apply to everything. Perhaps nothing will come of what I saw. Perhaps my superiors will decide that one storm, one ridge, one stubborn corporal proves nothing at all about a species spread across so many worlds. But I remember the sound of her voice through the wind, promising a man she could not hear that he was not alone. I remember the shape of her hands, ruined by cold, still finding a way to dig. I remember believing, with total certainty, that I was watching a goodbye, and being wrong in a way that changed how I understand every ending I witness from now on. I thought I was watching something die that night. I was watching something begin instead, something I still do not have a proper word for, though I suspect, given enough time, I will need to find one. My people have a long history of studying how things end. I believe humanity may finally be the reason we start studying how things refuse to.